Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. I'm Zach Gardner, the chief architect at Keyhole Software. And a few months ago, I went off on a little bit of a journey, maybe a sojourn, if you are so inclined. I wanted to go out and learn a bit more about generative AI, about machine learning. I just felt like I really didn't know enough. And given that every conference I attend, someone's talking about it. Every time I go out for coffee with some of my programmer buddies, somebody's talking about it. And really, you can get us going if you go out for beers. Everyone is talking about it. So I scoured the four corners of the World Wide Web and I found a really cool group of people that were willing to share their insights, that were able to give me a much broader and much better perspective than I was able to get if I would just kind of go at this journey alone. So today with me is my good friend Raj, who was at Hugging Face, which is the best logo in the business, by the way, like bar none. Now is an ML engineer at Snowflake. Raj, how's it going, dude?
It's going well. Excited to be here today.
Very cool. And for our more litigious audience members, the views and opinions expressed in this program, the views and opinions of the participants do not reflect their employers, do not reflect any trade or do not reflect any magazine subscriptions that they may have, if that is even still a thing. So, to get us started off with, Raj, why don't you give the audience a little bit of introduction to you? How did you get into technology? And kind of what's your career journey been like so far?
Oh, my career journey, it's been all over the place, back and forth. But I'll start with where I'm at now and kind of give you a little bit of kind of how I got there. So I recently joined Snowflake. I really focus on talking to enterprise customers about generative AI, and how they can succeed, how they can use it. And of course, I work for Snowflake, so I talk about kind of how Snowflake's stack there can do it. But really for me, I've been in the space of AI machine learning for about the last 10 years. I started off the first few years working as a data scientist at places like State Farm and Caterpillar. So I have a sense of what it's like in those to work inside large companies and try to kind of build a project and all the headaches you go through, all the data governance, you can't get sudo access on a box to be able to install some software. And I know those pains, but then I worked for those companies, but you only get to do a little bit of stuff because you're on one company, you're working two or three projects. And so then I moved over to this world around kind of AI and machine learning tools, where I worked for different companies, Snorkel, Data Robots, Hugging Face, where I talked to enterprises about, hey, here's all the different tools that you can use for AI and machine learning. And for me personally, I liked it because then I got to talk to 10, 20, companies in a given week. I could talk to insurance in the morning, manufacturing in the afternoon. I got to meet lots of different data science teams, see a lot of projects. And so that's what gets me pumped. I really like the world of AI and machine learning. And of course, I've spent the last 2 years at Hugging Face, where generative AI is kind of where it's the ground center for all that stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like something new comes out every day. Was it last night when the Nvidia CEO came out with the new chip? Like, I know it's so hard to keep track of this stuff.
It's really an amazing time, and it won't last forever, where we're really at this inflection where there's so many announcements on a regular basis. And the announcements, right, if you're in the generative AI space, actually make a difference. There's
Mhm.
actually concrete improvement like this. Like, and we've seen these fluxes before in different technologies. So I can tell people, like, it won't last forever. It'll get stable and boring after a while. But if you like that change, you like, being able to see something radically mind-blowing on a regular basis, like, this is the space for you.
Mhm. And selfishly, as a video cast host, great topic. Couldn't have
Mhm.
picked a better one if I tried. So, talk to me a little bit more about, what is Snowflake for those of, yeah, it's really big in healthcare. So I have, a pretty good grasp of it, but, kind of what are Snowflake's offerings? And then maybe more specifically, like your role, like it sounds like so much fun to just be able to talk to like insurance. I mean, talk to construction, just be like, y'all, I know you have your particulars in your industry, but like these are the things you really need to be thinking about.
Yeah. So I'll give my own version of the Snowflake story. I have no idea how true it is, but I just remember being in this space, 10 years ago, where everybody has to take their data. You have to put it in someplace. You have a database. And like 10 years ago, like the database admins were like the power people inside an IT organizations. It was one of the most complex, demanding jobs to keep databases up and running like that. And every company had a group of people doing it, and you had dedicated hardware and software, like from Oracle, kind of keeping those databases up and running. And it was a major task to do all of that. Snowflake kind of emerged with the growth of the cloud. So you could think of AWS and all those different pieces in the cloud with the idea like, hey, instead of like having all these companies with have their own databases and silos, like what if we just create one enormous database and we all just share it? And that's basically what they do is they have a huge cloud database, and they have a lot of security and governance around it to make sure, nobody's data kind of commingles with the ethers. But you plug into it, you go, you access your data, you do your engineering, all that stuff. You don't need as much skills, your data administrators, all that skill level has kind of gone down, making it much easier for folks to use. And this is why so many organizations kind of have all their data inside Snowflake. And so this is where Snowflake had one of the biggest IPO offerings in history, did so well because everybody's putting their data in there. But then, right, the last couple of years, right, like, what are we using data for? One of the biggest use cases for using data is I want to do machine learning, because in the past you have traditional analytics. I look back historically on the data, I see some trends, but right, I want to use machine learning. I want to use AI. I want to make better decisions going forward. I want to do forecasting. I want to identify which customers are likely there. So Snowflake has added its offerings of let's add in machine learning tools so people can do all of that while staying right next to their data. And so they don't have to take their data, move it to some other place where then you're outside of that security and governance boundary like that. And for me, as somebody who's worked in enterprises, I know like enterprises care a lot about their data. They care a lot about the governance of that. When you're just working on your laptop, you're doing your project at your university, it's not that big a deal. But the data is really what's the difference between kind of one set of companies versus another, is all that's knowledge in there. And so they very heavily kind of protect it. And so it was natural for me to kind of go to a place where like that data was foremost, because that's the interesting thing to do AI and ML. You need to have good data for those projects.
Yeah, and having massive amounts of data too is so important. Like you you could have like the coolest data in the world, but if you only got 3 records, like you're not going to be training something very meaningful off of that. So you mentioned, data governance, data privacy, data security. I'm curious, for some company out there, maybe they create bagels, because I don't know why. I think I've went to New York a bit too much, and just every example I think of revolves around bagels. But like if they wanted to create a large language model that would produce like the ideal recipe for bagels, like someone embarking upon that sort of large language model journey, like what are some of the things that they should be thinking about? Are there any tools that you would recommend, either for or against? Not throwing shade on anyone, just
Yeah.
just kind of sharing ideas on what
Yeah.
people could use.
So as a starting point, the bagel company should probably do things like build a churn model to figure out who their customers are, build a forecasting to see, how much they're going to sell. But right, suppose they want to tip into the world of generative AI and kind of use that for building. Now, it's important when we think about generative AI, these large language models that have, right, when you talk about large data, right, they have trillions of tokens. I mean, it literally, if you sat and read a book for something like 10,000 years continuously, you would still only have a small portion of the amount of knowledge that's inside the latest large language models like that have trillions of tokens. So the amount of knowledge these models have is enormous. And then when we use them, we're just retrieving, we're pulling that information out. It's going to try to put that information into a sensible way. But I think here's one of the catches when we're working with these generative models is they're trying to give us an answer that we like. They're trying to predict they're trying to predict an answer to our question. What they provide us isn't always accurate. Isn't always truthful. It's their best guess for what it is. So when you're asking like, hey, I want you to come up with a recipe, just like we've all played with ChatGPT and we know it can do crazy things. Like, right, I can make a Dr. Seuss or a Shakespeare bonnet poem of different things. you can create a new crazy recipe, but that recipe might not have anything to do with the physics of baking and might be just entirely garbage like that. So that's, a great example of like, the wonderful thing large language models can do is they can give you lots of creative recipes. And I think, I really like these models for helping us think creatively, where you could ask them, they could give you 10 different recipes and that could spark your mind for different ingredients and combinations, but they won't understand the chemistry of that. And so many of those recipes will actually taste horrible. But this is where I think it's good to have a human in the loop for all this stuff, because you working with the LM can then probably generate an even better recipe.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think back to probably last month was when OpenAI released Sora, and one of the first questions that I had was, "All right, this is cool. We can generate videos. How realistic are those videos?" Because I don't know if you know this, Raj, but if I drop this pencil, it's going at negative 9.8 meters per second squared. Like there is physics in the world, and no amount of video training is really going to be able to capture how like thermodynamics or fluid dynamics work. So it was amazing for me that they were able to build in integration with the Unity physics engine, because like the videos that come out of that thing are just are nuts. So first, that was awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
The something interesting that you said, it actually reminded me about a podcast that I was listening to when I was driving into work this morning in my, in my robotic car. As you can see, I'm living in the future. I think it was with the head of AI at Google, and he was saying one of the current limitations with LLMs is the distinction between fabrication, hallucination, and then just an outright lie. You and I, when we kind of think back upon our childhood, there's probably memories that we have that might not be completely factually correct. Our brain is trying to fill in the gaps. For us, I mean, a hallucination might be stretching it in terms of what that is. It's more just, it's a memory gap, but it's a way for our brains to process the world. Large language models do have a bit of probabilistic randomness built into their answers. So you could, lightning can't strike twice. You're always going to give it a different output. One of the things that I think that's, I don't know, scare people, but it seems to come up in like every single conversation I have with someone on this topic really is hallucinations. Other than, I think the first company to actually solve hallucinations could be the first $1 trillion company. Like it's going to be like massive. I'm curious if you have any recommendations for the listeners out there on, how, what is the impact that you've seen of hallucinations? Is there, I don't think there is a silver bullet, at least no one's discovered it yet. And anything that you have around, making sure that a human is always there to be able to sort of grade the answers and make sure this thing isn't going off into left field.
Yeah. So hallucinations are intrinsic in these models. And I think it's just hard for us to really grasp it if we're kind of casual users, because these models appear confident, right? The results they give us, they put it in a nice bullet point. You would think, right? Because from our past history, if somebody takes the time to write and organize it, an answer like that, it's probably a good answer. And we, as humans, are used to taking that form over the substance. And the models are really good at giving us that form that looks realistic, but the substance might be wrong. And so I think part of this is just like when the internet was introduced, we had to rethink of relationships. And, just because somebody's sending us an email doesn't mean it's authentic. In the same way, we're going to learn over the next 5, 10 years. It's going to take humans a little while to get this, but just because you see an output of a large language model doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. And the problem is a lot of people are going to fall for it. I mean, there's, one of the examples I like to use is in New York. There was a lawyer that had to finish their brief. They asked ChatGPT for an answer, cut and pasted that into a brief. Right, the answer looked good for them. It looked logical. They put it in. Well, the judge went to go look up the citations in there, couldn't find the citations. Right, they come to find out that ChatGPT fabricated it and fooled these people. And this is happening over and over again in our society, that we just don't have it yet. Everybody hasn't come to the realization that these models are going to hallucinate, and they're going to do that. And the nature of the design of the models as such, you're not going to get rid of the hallucinations. I mean, what most people do right now to reduce hallucinations is limit the use of the models.
Mm.
So one of the most popular uses of these models is something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, where I want to do questions. I want to ask the model questions, but I know it's going to lie to me. Like it doesn't know any information. So I pass it the source information and say, hey, get your answer from this. Like I know the answer somewhere in this 10-page book or 10-page letter, but I don't know where. Like find out the answer and then bring it back to me. And that's been so far kind of our quick fix to solve the hallucination problem, is really kind of focus on the search and making sure we pass good information into the model to limit that. But I think the nature of these models at this point, the way we've designed them, there's no silver bullet for that hallucination problem.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I was playing around with one of the earlier versions of ChatGPT and I gave it a data set and I asked it, can you run a random forest classification on it? And
Mhm.
within like 2 seconds, I mean, the file that I gave it was at least like 80 megs, if I remember right. And
Yeah.
within 2 seconds, it was like, I can do that, but the accuracy of it is 98.657. I was like, how there's no way that you actually ran a random forest classification because I didn't tell you the depth, I didn't tell you the number of nodes, but it's like Moses, coming down off of Mount Sinai, if I remember right. It just super authoritative. It knows everything. Is there anything that we can do just fundamentally to make, or maybe it's the way we interact with it, just to make it say like, hey, Anthropic Claude, like it's okay to tell me if you don't know the answer. Like you don't have to sound authoritative. Is this just like a user training thing, or is it just fundamentally it's just this is how the technology is?
So I think this was one of the remarkable things about like ChatGPT and kind of that personality it had when you asked it questions that really was very different than how previous people had introduced their chatbots and large language models. And it really gave it that anthropic human feeling, like you're talking to a buddy, even though it says it's not a language model, right? It kind of acts, it slowly, it looks like it's thinking the way kind of the text comes out. And like the latest Anthropic model is even much worse with like this notion of like it's self-aware and acting like that. And a lot of this is human controlled. I mean, we literally have humans telling the models to act as human-like as possible to convince humans to do that. And so we built this loop where we're really training these models. And we could easily change that. It doesn't have to be like that. The models could be humble. There could be a much starker division between what they do and that attitude. But they're also driven by usage. They want their models to be widely used. But it also kind of points a little bit to, we're not at the limit of the persuasiveness of these models. So far these models have been trained to be helpful, right? We don't want them to be harmless like that. But if you're building these models, you could tweak these knobs to even be a little bit more persuasive and a little bit more. Let's push on the cognitive biases humans have, or the emotional biases, and tweak that and train a model. Like again, you ask 100 humans how this works. You get the feedback from the humans. You put that in the model and train the model to even better prey on humans. Is totally within the realm of possibility like that.
Mhm. I was talking to the inventor of the App Store in a video cast before this, and he was saying, one of the things he's worried about too is like dating sites. You could probably have someone that was, sort of understood human psychology, and it would take a while for them to be able to really like understand how to manipulate people on dating sites. Or you could just have a generative AI go through and, just scour all the possible books on psychology and be able to manipulate people without them even knowing. It's not,
I mean,
it's not a new problem. It's just a more prolific problem. The barrier to entry is much lower.
and you see this already with the technologies around the generative for voice, where now you see the scams now where somebody calls your parents up, right, in your voice, saying that you're in prison or you've had a bad accident, right? They know that, right? These are the buttons to push, and it's been a very successful scam like that that's going on. So absolutely, you're going to see this
Mhm.
stuff kind of grow.
Yeah. And I mean, some of the things that came out, I think it was right before Halloween, the Biden administration pushing for things like safeguards that are built into the systems to prevent fraud against consumers. At least
Mhm.
generative AI, to your original point, is moving at a very rapid pace. It's moving, many miles per second. And it's interesting that the policies and the regulations, they're trying to keep up, but it's a game of cat and mouse. It is very tough. So before I let you go, I gotta get your prediction. AGI, is it going to happen in the next year, the next 5 years? We think Q Star, is this real?
It's going to take a long time. I'm very skeptical. Like a lot of the AGI is because we've been manipulated, that we've been fooled into this language, that these models are self-aware. They're really out there just retrieving, pulling knowledge. They're trained on so much information that really is more than our brains can understand like that. So I'm personally think AGI is way far away like that.
Agreed. No, I actually subscribe to the theory of quantum consciousness, and I just don't think that there's enough quantum particles that they have commingled together to be able to achieve consciousness. But that's a podcast for a different day, very different day. So, Raj, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for coming. I thoroughly appreciated this.
Thanks. This has been fun.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you in the future.